Hey everybody, we're back and super excited to be here again with another true OG in the industry, Paul from Edge Wallet, who's been building non-custodial wallets for quite a time now, and really been at it, right? Maybe Paul, share a bit of background on yourself, how you got into crypto, and yeah, maybe just share that with the audience. It'd be good,
Yeah.
good to hear.
So thanks for considering me an OG. I still to this day don't feel like I am because I still remember getting involved. I feel like an OG is the person that didn't have anyone else to learn from, really. You
Yeah,
get involved, there's no podcast and whatnot. And I was happy to be able to say that, when I got involved in 2013 is when I discovered Bitcoin, that I was able to lean on at least one podcast. So I guess that's OG enough. The fact that there was literally one podcast in all of the industry, which at the time
which
was just
podcast
Bitcoin.
was that? Which one was
Let's
that?
talk Bitcoin with Andreas Antonopoulos, Stephanie
Oh
Murphy.
yeah, 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 yeah.
And so I leaned a lot on the somewhat sometimes ramblings, but mostly very very insightful, educational words of Andreas. And so
Andreas.
I kind of miss him being more involved in some of the in-person events that he used to travel to, and I know he's been doing a lot of kind of virtual
Yeah,
courses and instructional courses, still very, very valuable, but admittedly, I
yeah,
kind of miss seeing him on a regular basis at the events. But yeah, that's when I got involved in 2013. Did believe very strongly in the self-custody space and, immediately started using self-custody wallets, used some exchanges for buying at the time, just buying,
yeah,
like,
yeah,
what do I need to sell into Bitcoin? Um, but felt that self-custody was so horribly more difficult than custodial, that there was an opportunity there. There was an opportunity to actually simplify self custody. And that's when, gosh, only within what, 7, 8 months after I discovered Bitcoin, decided to actually create a company and a product focused on making self custody much, much easier for people, and easier defined as familiar, right? Because you can make something that you think is easy, but for another person, if it's unfamiliar, that could actually be the thing that's alienating.
yeah.
It's really about familiarity. And I talk about familiarity as being an important thing if you look at credit cards. So would think that paying with Bitcoin is harder because it's unfamiliar. Imagine if you went in reverse and we got used to paying in Bitcoin, scan a QR code, spend, scan a QR code, spend. And
Yeah.
then someone said, now you have to take a physical card, slide it through this machine, have it print out these two copies of paper that you then have to sign one of them. And someone would say, that's kind of harder, right? But we're so used to that today that what you're
Yeah.
accustomed to helps define ease, even if it's
Yeah.
physically harder. It's familiar. But anyway, so that's kind of the background. That's when I started building at the time the company called Airbits and the product called Airbits, which is still who we are today. It's the same company, but it's just a rebrand. It's a refocus of what we do today versus what we originally did back in 2014, 2015, with a focus now on multiple different cryptocurrencies, buying, selling, trading, and then decentralized financial services. That's what we do
Yeah.
today.
Interesting. And getting into product, why building a product? You had some technical background, right? I mean, you worked in the tech industry, you studied
Yeah.
technology. And so how were you a product engineer before, a product manager before, or were you a developer before? How did you get into why build?
Why build? So I was a
Yeah.
developer before. I worked for a little bit less than a decade for Nvidia, for which
Yeah.
I'm sure people in the mining world are familiar with the name, and gaming and mining. They're almost
Yeah.
a household name. Um, so I was a developer. I wouldn't call myself a product manager at that time, but I did see a lot of products come across my plate.
Yeah.
And then actually, it's because I left tech and went into small business that I started to appreciate the technology products that I used,
Yeah.
or not appreciate, or really want changes in them. And I started looking at ways of building a product that people would touch and use and improve on what existed today. And it was through being a user that was not a developer that I still that's when I really, really started wanting to build something in specifically this industry.
Yeah.
I thought about and had opportunities in other industries, but nothing had me feeling as passionate and driven as Bitcoin. Like I felt like there was a purpose. This is going to go in the history books as being one of the most revolutionary industries over the past several hundred years, and I just wanted to be a part of that. Like I'm sure you do as well.
Yeah. And I think, you look back, right? And Bitcoin came around in 2009. And where we're at today,
Mhm.
Jerome Powell is now commenting on in his statements that, Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies is and are influencing his policy making, right? And so over a
Yeah,
period
for
of
better or
12
worse.
years, it's now on, yeah, for better or worse, right? But
Yeah.
still,
I
it's
remember.
having an influence, right? It's definitely changing the game, right? Slowly and for better or for worse. Ultimately, it's a threat to where they're at, from a
Yep.
monopolistic position to all of a sudden being, there's an alternative currency out there.
Yep. And that's what got me super excited. I
Yeah,
was very excited about just generally disruptive technologies, and also just what I consider to be contrarian thinking from what
yeah,
is the norm of the past several hundred years. Like I've always
yeah,
like tried to open my mind to like, oh, this is how we've just been doing it for X number of years, decades, millennium. But is there a new alternate way of thinking? Because if you
yeah,
look back at history, those are the most disruptive, the ones that completely change the mindset. And by doing that, you also get the most amount of friction from the existing, population. That's
yeah,
normal because most people don't like abrupt amount of change. You get into the groove and you get used to something, and change is difficult. And it's especially difficult in money because you've got a lot of discomfort in changing money because you have a lot of people that then lose it. Um, but that's where, admittedly, a lot of the excitement comes into play. Because before getting into Bitcoin, I definitely had like opinions of distrust in a lot of the establishment, not
yeah,
just in money, but in other industries, whether it be kind of health, wellness, food industry.
yeah.
And I found that when I got into the Bitcoin space, a lot of those people kind of had the similar emotions and feelings and backgrounds. Like, wow, I was very surrounded by like-minded people. And that's why I've been in this space for so long now. It's not just something that I want to do to change the world, but I'm surrounded by a lot of sharp, intelligent, like-minded. Obviously, the space has grown, and that some of the like-minded start becoming a smaller and smaller percentage, but they're still there, and I still appreciate their existence within this industry.
Yeah, and I suppose that's always the thing, right? So when an industry grows, it's sort of more a revolution or a movement that really
Mm-hmm.
drives the initial momentum. And then it sort of shifts as more participants engage into the community. It sort of dilutes that
Original.
core mission, original idea or original momentum. And
Yep.
so much to the extent that today, there are fractions like there were before, though. Even we had different types of fractions, but now the fractions are more, we have to be more regulated, or we have to be more independent, and we have to be more non-custodial. And I know you have a lot of opinions around that,
Oh
particularly
yeah.
with DeFi and TradFi, right? I mean, it's like
Yeah.
they're,
Yeah.
they're two different worlds. And in this last contagion, as we call it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we
Oh my
saw
God.
this DeFi, these central finance entities that actually had custodians, were regulated, were licensed, were managed by licensed individuals. All of a sudden, they're the ones that got corrupted by this whole ecosystem, did bad risk management, etc. Right? And so
All
DeFi,
inflated.
this whole time though, stood solid, right? It held its ground.
Right.
The policy stuck to it. The protocols were holding their their governance. They were sticking to
Yeah.
their
They followed
governance.
its rules.
Yeah,
Yep. So I'm going to give, I'm probably going to get hated for this, but I'm going to give a little bit of flack to DeFi, even though I'm absolutely a big fan of it.
yeah,
Is that, yes, a lot of the CeFi institutions mismanaged risk,
yeah,
but one of the biggest risks that they mismanaged was in a DeFi protocol, right? In a way, you can kind of consider UST
yeah.
a DeFi protocol. However, if you think about it, the entire protocol of UST was completely outlined in open source code. And
Totally.
so you could know exactly the risks.
Yeah,
You knew exactly the risk you were getting into, and you know the reward potential by getting into UST, Luna, and all of that. And for CeFi institutions to put and pour a tremendous amount of money in that protocol was entirely their mismanaged choice. It's a high risk at the time, pretty high return opportunity, but that's their choice to put funds there. The protocol as it is operated as it was intended. All right. And if people pulled a lot of money out, that was a risk that UST would collapse. Every stable coin has a threshold by which if money is pulled out, it can collapse. And it simply did happen for UST. Why did it happen? Many different reasons. And there was, a lot of theory that there could have been some inside malicious intent behind
yeah,
it, manipulated intent, but the protocol still stood and operate as intended. So this can happen to other stablecoin protocols, but then at least there's this transparency. You know what risk you're getting into. Now, in the CeFi world, it's all black box. Who knows what's happening to your money? And that's kind of the part that we're trying to avoid with DeFi in general. So you're right. The contagion completely imploded, gosh, now probably half a dozen different companies. And the more important thing is it didn't implode just the companies, it imploded the users. And I think that's the piece that people need to realize, that when you put your money into these services, you're putting money, you're like an investor in the company. You're actually, and I think the actual fine print is that you are giving a loan to the company. That's effectively what you're doing. You're giving a loan. And as a loan, you're a creditor, and that loan might not get paid back. And it's effectively what happened with these companies that effectively took user funds and weren't able to pay them back.
So the T's and C's stipulate you're giving me a loan and I'm taking that loan and I'm putting that to use accordingly. And interesting. I didn't know that.
And I'll pay you back some of that money, just like if if a bank lent you, you're supposed to pay back that money and pay it back with interest, and the bank effectively makes revenue on that interest. It's the same way you're giving BlockFi or Celsius money as a loan, and they're going to pay you back hopefully with interest, but that is not guaranteed to actually come back to you. And so there's some not equivalent risks, but parallel risks in DeFi, in the sense that the protocol might not work as intended, that there could be a bug in the protocol that people didn't foresee. So there's technical risks in DeFi. And those are probably the biggest risks there. It's not that you're worried a protocol will mismanage funds or make bad decisions, because what decisions are made, and most of those decisions are very simple. It's the simple fact that, well, what we code is supposed to be the decision-making engine might not be what we intended to code. And so that's that risk. And that has happened in DeFi, right? There has been money lost in DeFi. However, if you look at the two risks, which one do we think can improve over time versus which one do we think is just simply going to get worse over time or not really improve? And fundamentally, time has shown that large institutions holding other people's money will tend to corrupt over time. All right, corrupt, mismanage, lose people's funds. That's happened, decades and decades over and over again, right? Over and over again. Whereas technology tends to stabilize over time, especially when it's similar technology to what was built in the past. Obviously, you come up with some whiz-bang new thing, it's going to have to stabilize. But a money market, which is a vast majority of DeFi protocols, some money going in, money getting borrowed, money being used and whatnot, is relatively straightforward, and those protocols will stabilize over time. So I put my bet on DeFi. Like, fundamentally, while there's risk today, I feel like that risk is going down over time, and it's held its ground. Like you said, in this past contagion, DeFi, generally speaking, held its ground.
I mean, we have a statement: "Not your coins, not your money." Right? I mean, that's always been
all the time.
Sort of, and so that's what Edge Wallet's really built, right? I control my coins, my keys through the wallet, and then allows me then to interact with the different coins that
protocols,
are out there,
coins, tokens,
exactly.
And so like we could go out of business like a BlockFi or Celsius, and everyone would still have their money. That's the important thing to note, is that we can't mismanage users' funds. We might mismanage our own. That's entirely feasible, like most companies. You have to figure out where you want to allocate your resources, but it won't lose users' funds due to our decisions on what we do with our own money. That's the key takeaway.
Yeah, I mean, you're basically a window into a user's assets that are locked into the blockchain, right? You're providing an interface into that for users to then interact with the different protocols.
Exactly. That is the key thing, is that if you think about it, blockchains are kind of like banks, but where it's multiple banks holding the same ledger of transactions. And what Edge is effectively, but it's just a UI interface to those banks, which are the nodes, which are the networks. Much like a browser is how you access your online banking account. We're kind of the browser in a way. Right. So it's a loose analogy, but definitely an analogy that's worth understanding, because it's the technology you're accessing. It's the interface technology to access the actual backend services that you're interested in.
Yeah, it's a bit like, I think that analogy is not bad, right? Where actually the blockchain is the bank, and all the nodes in the blockchain are the branches, and they're all maintaining them independently, the ledger, right? So they all have access to that information. One of the things though you brought in, I want to come back to that, was where you talk about, the black box, right? And blockchain and non-custodial services are very transparent, right? So everybody can see all the transactions on there. They've all got an explorer and a wallet address. You can sort of track sort of the amount in a wallet address, and you can track the movements associated with the wallet address. How do you see that sort of evolving, and that difference sort of between that transparency, the openness, versus the sort of clandestine closed room decision making in the TradFi world?
Got it. So I'll draw a line between two kinds of transparency versus black box opacity or opaqueness, I guess you could say.
Opaqueness, yeah.
One is what is the system doing with your money?
Yeah.
Right. Like when you go and send a transaction, or you send a transaction to a DeFi protocol, or you send it to a multi-sig address, what are the rules by which that money can move? Right. That is fully transparent in blockchains.
Yeah.
Even in private blockchains, ones where you can't see the money actually move, but you can at least see the rules by which they move. So it's the rules by which money can move versus being able to actually see the money move. Let's kind of like can we draw that line in the sand? That kind of like is a good distinction.
Sure.
And so with CeFi and traditional banks, traditional financial services, is you don't really know the rules by which that money can move. They tell you what they roughly will say are the rules, like, oh, you need to come to us and log in, and that's when the money can move. But then you have this huge legal contract that is very ambiguous, that in the end of the day says they can move your money for whatever reason, right? That's the black box. You don't know all those other ways that the money could move. Now, can you actually see the money move? Like, is it transparent when the money moves? Admittedly, CeFi, except for to the government, is relatively opaque.
Yeah.
Like it's actually in many ways more private than blockchains, except for when you think about privacy to governments, because governments can talk to any financial service and say, hey, we want to see all the transactions that this specific person is making. How much are they? Who are they sending money to? So CeFi, TradFi are opaque to us, but very transparent to the government and to themselves. In the contrast, blockchains are transparent to everybody, right? But at the same time, don't immediately have names associated with that transparency. You see numbers, you see wallet addresses and whatnot. You don't see, but you don't see names. But if you can associate a name, then you see all the transactions in that address to a certain name. However, I am very, very excited about private blockchains, and it's one of the things that has anchored a lot of our effort here at Edge. We put probably more than the average self-custody app wallet, whatever you want to call it, self-custody app wallet amount of effort into supporting privacy-focused blockchains, where you still know the rules by which money will move because it's still open source. You can look at the source code. You know that if you sign a transaction, that money will move. If you don't have a signature, you don't have the private key, the money won't move. But you don't see publicly where that money is going. You don't know how much it's moving, where it's coming from. That I'm very excited about. We were the first app that supported Monero and any other asset, for our first multi-asset app to support Monero back as early as 2018, I believe, when Monero had very, very little support at that time. We're, I think, only like the second multi-asset app to support Zcash in full privacy mode. As a matter of fact, we only support Zcash in full privacy mode. We don't let people receive to transparent addresses inside of the app because that compromises your privacy. And we're looking at several other privacy coins for implementation inside of the app. And they're the hardest assets to support by and large, no question about it. There is no asset we've ever had to add support for that's harder than either one of those two. But we're committed. We feel like that is an important piece of the puzzle. And we hope that level of privacy starts creeping into some of the more popular chains, such as Bitcoin, Ethereum, Bitcoin Cash, you name it, Dash. I know there's some efforts, but generally speaking, the efforts have been very poorly adopted, unfortunately.
I mean, so a lot of the efforts have gone into mixing, right? And the mixing protocols. But just before I go down that path, I just wanted to we talked, Monero and Zcash are sort of the oldest sort of privacy coins out there, right? Do you see any newer coins that are coming up that are also trying to build out privacy capabilities, really deep entrenched, as good as Monero is really building that out?
What I'm seeing are coins that are either forks of one of those two.
Okay.
right? So Pirate
Yeah.
Chain's really growing in popularity,
Yeah.
and it's a fork of Zcash
Yeah.
with pretty much all the technology that the ECC team, Electric Coin Company, had built with Zcash, but removing a lot of the criticisms that have been imparted on Zcash. And I love the guys over at Zcash. So if you're listening,
Yeah.
I still love what you guys are up to. I love the efforts, but criticisms do what criticisms do. Throw them at us as well if you need to. But with Zcash, there was the trusted setup.
Yeah.
All right, that is getting eliminated with a most recent hard fork of Zcash to support Orchid. But the original trusted setup was a criticism. But more than that is that there's a slice of the mining rewards that go to a company, that go to the Electric Coin Company, which I think then also delegates some to the foundation. So a lot of people don't like that. I think it's neither here nor there. But if you're not a fan of a decentralized protocol paying a centralized company, then you might want to do something different. And that's where Pirate Chain came in. They ripped out the mining reward going to the ECC. And as well, they ripped out publicly visible, transparent addresses. So there's no way to do a transaction on Pirate Chain other than through these private stealth addresses. And that is another criticism. It's a criticism I've laid onto Zcash as well, which is why Monero has so much more adoption, is that there's no way to do a non-private transaction. All transactions are private by default. Privacy by default is one thing I'm a big fan of. And I think optional privacy, it's not as bad as no privacy, but it's like a 10x loss as soon as privacy becomes optional. You ever use Telegram?
Yeah,
Stefan? I'm pretty sure you have, right? But have you used Signal? I think we've tried possibly on Signal before. So Signal is a privacy by default. Telegram is an optional privacy. And a lot of people got into Telegram in its early days, like 2014, 15. I got into it because crypto people introduced me to it. They got into it for its privacy. Yeah. Ironically, the privacy is optional and also kind of difficult to use. You have to jump through hoops to use it. And so people just end up using Telegram in a non-private mode. So it was almost like a bait and switch. Hey, there's this Telegram thing can let you do this great privacy, blah, blah, blah. But no one used it because it was hard. And I think that's the challenge that Zcash has right now, is that so much of the ecosystem that's adopted Zcash, especially the exchanges, they don't want to lose those exchanges. There's, as a company, ECC focused on adoption, it's fair that you want to get exchange support. But when you make mandatory privacy, you'll likely lose some of that exchange support. But I'm hoping a direction they want to go to. Yeah, privacy by default.
Yeah, no, but I mean, a lot of governments have really clamped down on this whole privacy element, right? I mean, not only because it's a threat to their existence and it's another cryptocurrency, but it's AML and there's a lot of money laundering going on through these coins, so much so that they've banned it on exchanges in certain jurisdictions. And it's been mainly because if I want to do business with the US government has banned it, I can't engage in that, right? And so how do you see that evolving? And what's your argument there around that? How do you sort of justify to users that this is a reason why we need to keep privacy going?
So I think less about the reason to keep privacy going, but I'm going to take a page and give credit to Zuko Wilcox from ECC Zcash community and one of the founders. He gave a presentation a few years ago on the history of the internet and internet encryption. Okay. And realized when encryption first came out, the government was wholeheartedly against it. Yeah. Right? They banned export of software that allowed encryption that they could not break. Like your standard SSL encryption, the little green lock icon you get in your browser. It was banned to export a browser out of the US that could do that level of encryption. And then people started using the internet for not just downloading, porn movies and surfing cat pictures and all the stuff that the government thought what the internet was for. They're like, oh, that's just for people doing this, random toy stuff. And now it's people wanted to access their DMV records. Yeah. They wanted to actually look at their loan, bank history, actually issue wire transactions.
Their health records.
Put credit card information on the internet. And they realized it was a huge risk for people to be doing that without unbreakable encryption. Yeah. And so they fully flipped their opinion and went from, we're trying to ban this and clamp it down and prevent people from using it, to we're going to mandate it. Yeah. So the government now today mandates that any financial service company use SSL encryption for any communication with their end users. Right? Same thing with any government website. So once the government starts using the tool, they will want the privacy.
And then it's okay.
Right? That's really it. That's really it. And so I look at it this way. How many, like, what year did you get into Bitcoin, Stefan?
2012, I bought my first Bitcoin.
Damn, God, I wish I got in 2012. Good for you. How many politicians mentioned the word Bitcoin in 2012?
Pretty much none.
Yeah, exactly. None, right? And so I can't count how many have mentioned it today. Right? Think about it. I can't count in at least one hand. I don't know them all off the top of my head.
In some way.
In some way, shape, or form. Many are against it.
What they're talking about, but
if they don't know what they're talking about, they hate it. But I can't count in one hand how many are for it.
Yep.
Right. There's more for it than 10x, if not 50x more than back when you got involved in 2012. Yeah. And that's only going to amplify every year.
Yeah.
And as those people get involved and start to promote the use of it, they'll realize, God, the transparency and the privacy sucks. Like, I kind of would like something better, both for myself and then also for whatever departments they're working with. Like, because that financial privacy is important to the government. The government wants to know everything you're doing, but they want to keep everything that they do private. That's kind of right. It's all for me, none for you. Exactly. However, in order for me to get the privacy, me being, if I'm the government or I'm a government official, I have to have the tools to have that financial privacy. And if crypto starts getting used, then the tool for financial privacy, guess what? Are the privacy protocols, the mixers, the privacy coins. And then it starts to become, well, shoot, how can we then ban it across our end users, which are the citizens, but then use it for ourselves? Because then it's not as useful of a protocol if we can only use it for ourselves. So that's kind of the prediction, right? I don't feel like, to your listeners, we need to kind of define the value of privacy, but show how we have a path forward for it actually getting adopted and being accepted and not being banned and clamped down by every government in the world. It's because people forget. They think this big bad government is this building, with pillars in front of it, made out of concrete, and it's 100 years old. No, government is people. People forget that government is actually made of people, and people change over generation, and they start wanting different things. And one of those things that they're going to start wanting is crypto, and crypto with privacy. So it'll get there, and we'll get it as well.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting, right? Because how does that then play out in the CBDC roles, right? Will the CBDCs be publicly available, right? And if they're publicly available, does that mean every department and every treasury will have a wallet address, they will ultimately have to publicize and show what the funds are, what the fund movements are in there? No?
Yeah, CBDC is nothing more than
oh, for sure.
The clear distinction of a CBDC is that it is a government level end user bank account.
Yeah.
And what people need to distinguish is they realize that no one in a country, no individual, no citizen has a bank account with the central bank.
Yeah.
Like, the central bank doesn't issue bank accounts. They leave it to the private banks to do that. A CBDC is just a bank account with the central bank. Yeah. So in essence, I think the biggest threat, like who is threatened by CBDC, isn't crypto. It's actually the private banks.
Yeah.
Because if I can transfer money between my account and your account, Stephen, then what do we need the private banks for? Maybe the financial services, maybe they're the ones that give out loans and whatnot. But from the viewpoint of money transfer, if you've got an account over in Austin with some Austin credit union, and maybe I've got like a Wells Fargo account, it's a bit of a pain in the ass for me to pay you. Right? Like, we may have to go through another third party that sits on top of the banks, like a PayPal and whatnot. But if we both have CBDC bank accounts, then I can easily send you funds.
Yeah.
And then because there's not a delay of multiple centralized parties, the fraud risk goes down as well. Right? Fraud's much higher when you're dealing with two parties that don't trust each other, such as Wells Fargo and Bank of America. And the beauty of that too is if the fraud risk goes down, guess what else you can do more easily? You can buy crypto.
Yeah, that's the beauty. Yeah. I mean, in a way, I do like the fact that if the governments want to do CBDC, perfect, do that. Make sure it's available and transparent, yet provide an alternative, right? So it just verifies that crypto should be around. We should have alternate coins available, they will then try and regulate all the other coins according to give the CBDCs a competitive advantage in some form or fashion.
Yeah, they for sure.
Yeah,
they for sure will. And I think once again, the key is people make up the government. And I think as the government changes and people more forward thinking start entering positions of power, they realize that the CBDCs don't empower people any more than they were previously empowered, other than to bypass the private banks. Right? So they're able to bypass private banks to a degree. But are you going to be able to do things you couldn't do before? So if a private bank is going to restrict your ability to move money, well, the government will do the same. Yeah. Like, I don't imagine that, because it's the government, I can move money more freely, more easily to more jurisdictions than I could with a private bank. Now, your restrictions are just the same. It just might be easier for me to go from what would normally have been Wells Fargo, Bank of America. Now I just go,
1 point.
Jerome Powell to Jerome Powell Bank. It's easy. So that, I think, is the fundamental benefit, which is, to me, incremental as opposed to fully disruptive with more truly decentralized, censorship resistant, globally accessible crypto and Bitcoin.
Yeah, and especially when the people, they're professional politicians today, right? They don't necessarily, they have their own careers at mind versus the benefit of the overall prosperity of a nation or an economy itself, right?
Exactly. You guys are trying to keep their job.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, trying to keep their job. And if the voting pool.
Yeah, of course. And they're only interested in the voting pool around voting time, right? And then afterwards,
true.
I don't need to fulfill those promises and be accountable for what I promised.
I got 3 years to chill, do what I want, and then I got 1 year to actually, get some votes.
Work it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the other thing I think is interesting to me is the amount of funding and government allocation towards funds versus actually saying, why don't we put that money towards innovation and try to allow a prosperity associated with that innovation and tackle the specific issues and go after a specific issue or bad actors versus everybody's a bad actor and we have to block everything down. We have to regulate everything. And we're going to put all this money behind the enforcement of these regulations versus one example is in the Inflation Reduction Act, they actually put in there, I think, 80 billion that goes towards the IRS and another 80,000 headcount to enable the IRS to actually go and implement and use that 80 billion, right? And so with $80 billion, I could build a whole new tax code and make it so easy for people to supply and submit tax information in a nice web interface using a bit of AI to find anomaly, etc. I mean, what could you do with that money and how much jobs would you be creating after that, right? And streamlining a lot of the propositions and making sure that anybody can use it versus just Ernst & Young and PricewaterhouseCoopers and all the other 50,000 accountants that are employed to submit yours, mine, and everybody else's tax forms.
I'm blown away. I'm wondering if they'll even be able to, if you think about government spend, I don't know that government ever thinks about ROI on their spend when you can just print more money. But if you think of the ROI, do they expect to collect $80 billion more in taxes by having hired $80 billion worth of people to do the collection? I don't know that they'll actually accomplish that goal of collecting more money in taxes. Because you're right, some of the friction is less about the IRS going and hunting the money down. The problem is that sometimes it's just hard to give you the right amount of money. You don't even know how much you owe because you've got 1,000 different conditions by which you calculate what effectively comes down to a single number. Right? In the end of the day, you spend hours and hours to come out with a single number. And that complexity is what sometimes will just simply get someone either not paying an incorrect amount, whether too much or too little. And a lot of times people also just throw up their hands and actually like, I just want to go to jail, pay more.
Yeah.
So will having more IRS agents actually collect more money for the government, or are you just burning our tax dollars, right? Which I'd rather just have back.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. And so they hired a university to help them write a report in terms of what the revenue scenario would look like with 80 billion investment and 80,000 new headcount. And ultimately, the revenue comes in like 6 years down the road. And ultimately, in 6 years, nobody's around anymore. Everybody's forgotten
Yeah.
it. And so nobody cares, right? And so ultimately, if it happens or doesn't,
I take it
it's a
back.
mute point.
They're guaranteed going to be profitable. That ROI is going to be profitable, guaranteed, because the dollar, the value of the dollar, will make them profitable in dollar
We're making
units.
profit, yeah.
Yeah, maybe not in this stable coin that you're building, right? So maybe that's how they should measure their ROI. And in that sense, I don't think you're going to be getting anywhere with that 80 billion for sure.
Well, ultimately, I mean, the dollar, whilst on the one hand, from an inflation perspective, it's going down. However, compared to other currencies around the world,
Yeah, it's going
it's
up.
significantly higher, right? So it's going
Yeah,
up. But
no,
that's
that it
largely
is.
because the interest rates are going up, right? So
Yeah, I mean, just
faster than
imagine
anywhere
how
else.
much other countries are just absolutely tanking in their purchasing power, considering that it's already hurting here in the U.S. and we're doing the best out of all of the other currencies. It just must be hitting the rest of the world hard. And I think people forget that when it hits the rest of the world hard, that's still a form of contagion, which will eventually come back and bite us in the butt. Like that's money
Definitely.
they can't spend on U.S. goods and services, and we do need to export goods, services, products in order to stay comfortable. If we can't do that, then things start falling apart and going spiral.
And it's double whammy, right? Because not only is the dollar going up in terms of making it more expensive, it's also oil is denominated in dollars. And a lot of these countries are dependent on oil and gas for energy supply. And so ultimately they have to pay for that in dollar as well as the ability to export. Export might be easier, but how do they buy all the foods and the goods that they need in
Wow.
addition to that, right?
So it has been
So,
reported that a lot of countries, especially those that are sanctioned, Russia, Iran, and whatnot,
yeah.
um, are not using the dollar to be able to purchase oil. However, what's interesting, and I don't know the answer to this, and maybe Stefan, you might have some insight of this, is while they're not using the dollars to purchase oil, I've heard they're even using cryptocurrency. The question being is, what are they denoting the value of oil in? Are they saying, hey, pay us X number of dollars worth of whatever asset? Or are they saying, pay us X number of yuan? To buy or Russian rubles to buy oil. That I think is the most key thing. It's not about what they're using to pay, because the sanctions are basically sanctioning a payment method. Right?
Yeah.
You're not really sanctioning a currency, because at the end of the day, you can use almost any payment method to denote payment of a specific currency. But it's the unit of account, and I think that's what we've really lacked in the entire crypto industry since the days of Bitcoin, is using a crypto as a unit of account.
Yeah.
And I've prophesized this for a while. I've posited that once we start using crypto as a unit of account, that's when whatever crypto that is, whether it's Bitcoin, Ether, whatnot,
Yeah.
starts to stabilize.
Yeah.
People don't know this, but actually oil, there are long-term contracts in oil that span decades, where people will purchase X amount of oil over decades for a specific price. They're actually locking in a price for decades worth
Yeah.
of oil. What does that do to and they're doing that, of course, in dollars by and large over the past many years. So what does that do to the dollar? It stabilizes it, because on both sides of the equation, both the buyer and the seller kind of want stability in that asset, right? The buyer doesn't want the dollar to go up in value. The seller doesn't want it to go down in value. So they're motivated to stabilize that coin. How do you motivate to stabilize that coin? You also use it in the rest of your pipeline of business. So much like think of it from a small business point of view. Let's make the analogy into a small business. So a small business was banked on the price of Bitcoin, right? Like the price of Bitcoin has to be one of the key drivers of your business. Well, if a lot of your expenses are denoted in Bitcoin, what are you going to want to do? You're going to want to earn in those units. You're going to want to charge other people in those units, because you know that that's the unit that you're going to be spending in.
Yeah.
Same thing as when you pay your staff, your employees.
Yeah.
Once you know the unit that you can predict over time that what your expenses are going to be, you're going to want your income to be pegged in that unit as well. So this is what's happening with oil, which is creating the stability for the dollar relative to other currencies. We really need to get crypto to that point of view, where we denote things in it. And we started to slightly do that here at Edge. Very, very little bit. We had a few contractors that we hired, a few gigs, and we quoted the gig in Bitcoin. Said, hey, this amount of Bitcoin for that gig. That's a short-term contract. And some people we even gave Bitcoin options to. A lot of people get options of the company. You join a startup, you get some options that vest over X number of years. Those options are never denoted in dollars. They're always denoted in shares. Well, for a couple people in the company, early days, we said, hey, we're going to give you Bitcoin options, just like stock. They vest over 4 years. Here's the exact amount of Bitcoin that you're going to receive. As long as you stay with the company, they continue to vest. And yeah, one out of the 2 people we offered to stayed through full vesting, 10x value in their Bitcoin options. And I think that's what, as an industry, we need to start doing, is creating these agreements that are in units of a crypto that helps stabilize the price. And then that helps replace fiat.
I love that, right? And I really want to see that more and more. I did that right at the beginning and throughout whenever I had the chance, pay me in your native token. If you have a token, pay me in your token, or pay me in Polkadot, pay me in Bitcoin Cash, pay me in whatever you want, whatever you can pay me in, Nodl tokens and Zuku token. I was paid in all these different tokens. And then but the funny thing to me was, every time that token appreciated, there was always a slight contention that I paid you so much money, you should be working for free for me, right? Because in their mind, even though they paid me in that native token, they never saw the risk that I was taking. It could have also equally been a shitcoin. Yeah. It could have gone down. And their mind was, oh, it went up. You made so much money. You can work an extra couple of months for free. It's like, hang on, that doesn't work like that, right? Because either way, you paid that amount. Even if you converted it into a stable coin and paid me, I saved you that liquidity. So it's like, that was always a double-edged sword.
Well, you look at it from the same viewpoint of stock. Say you work for a company, right? And they give you a stock option. Yeah. So, 2 years into a 4-year vesting cycle, say the company just explodes and that stock's worth a lot of money. No one goes to their staff and go, oh, you should be working for me for free. You got all these stock options. They don't say that. And it's exactly the same thing with a coin. You don't go and tell your staff that. In a way, the coin is the stock of that project. And while we didn't control Bitcoin, we offered it as Bitcoin because that is stock in the industry that we were trying to build and trying to promote. And it's much harder because we can't print Bitcoin out of thin air the way you can print stock. But from the viewpoint of the coin projects, they absolutely should do it that way. Now, maybe there should be a mix, right? Where it's not 100% coin. Like, hey, here's a dollar value. Even if we pay it to you in Polkadot, here's a dollar value that is consistent, 5, 10 grand a month, that kind of thing. And then here's your options, right? Which are pegged in the actual coin units. And now you've got some stability, plus you've got the volatility, just like stock options versus your payroll. That I think would be a great balance. And I think more companies should exercise that. And I think some do, especially those that are in coin projects that actually have an allocation. And you hear about like the token vesting schedule. I think they generally do exercise that. But now when you're outside of the company, an entity that can't just print the coins or hasn't been able to print the coins, for it to then be a part of the ecosystem of their expenses versus their income, that to me is kind of when we've hit that golden point of really adopting a crypto.
Yeah, no, I definitely, ultimately, there's a risk appetite, but also I think the advantage of skin in the game is really, an element there that really matters. And I think we needed that at the beginning of Bitcoin, particularly helping scale and have more evangelists out there that had skin in the game and would evangelize and advocate for and educate for this currency.
Halfway there as far as skin in the game, as opposed to like quoting someone X amount of Bitcoin that you're going to pay them over some amount of years. And really just paying them in the currency, even if you in units of dollars, can get you almost halfway there. So we've been paying people in Bitcoin since day one, right? No one's ever received dollars. No staff has ever received dollars. And what we find is, since there is friction to convert into dollars, many people keep Bitcoin and they end up having skin in the game. Even though we never quoted them a Bitcoin amount, they're like, oh, this month I don't really need to sell any of it because I feel like I have enough saved up from blah, 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 and I've got enough to pay my bills. I'll keep this paycheck worth of Bitcoin. All right. Okay. And then there you go. They now have skin in the game without realizing it. Whereas the friction to buy Bitcoin, if you're paying them in dollars, becomes higher than if you had friction to sell it. So we'd like to give them friction on the sell side that motivates, skin in the game versus friction on the buy side. Which then is like, well, I'll leave myself without any skin in the game or with less skin in the game. So exactly. Really, that is a first step.
Yeah, and I think that's one angle that I mean, Bitcoin to me really, it's a store of value, right? It's really become, the gold 2.0, right? And you can
Yeah,
hold your
yeah,
value there. It addresses inflation, right? So it actually tackles
yeah,
that. But there's a lot of volatility associated with it, and that's where stable
yeah,
coins came in and provided a great user experience, in my view, because it provided a bit more stability, the convertibility into real world and into dollars, and has now by default become the de facto, currency reserve of crypto land, right? With $65
yeah,
billion daily trading volume, Tether is really the de facto standard, more so than Bitcoin in terms of trading volume. And so
absolutely.
that
Yep.
has really proven to be an interesting hedge. How can and so anyway, but it's still pegged to
Yeah,
the US dollar, which is fiat
still
denominated,
is.
which is a whole different currency model, right?
Yeah, it's the concept of what exactly is the definition of stable, and
Yeah,
admittedly, compared to Bitcoin, even in its 10-year cycle, its volatility, at least on a macro level, from all-time highs to new lows, that kind of thing, is still above people's easy to stomach threshold.
yeah,
Right? It's still
definitely.
hard to stomach a 80% drop, 70% drop within months.
Yeah,
Within just a few months. That's
weeks
definitely outside
or
of the norm.
days.
Sometimes weeks. Hopefully, it goes to at least months. And so, admittedly, yeah, the dollar going. Even if the dollar is going down in value at 15% a year,
Yep.
which the government won't admit, but depending on how you measure it, it's gone down 15%.
Yeah.
In a year, is still at least more palatable than the volatility of 70% drops,
Yeah.
within, like you said, weeks or months.
Definitely. Definitely.
But I think like that, there's like the way to solve that really is to um, have some way of getting financial contracts and agreements denoted in units of some
Crypto
crypto.
assets.
And
Yeah.
Bitcoin's the most likely,
Yeah.
because it does have a bit more of the price stability. It's the gold 2.0, just like the dollar used to be just a payment method for gold.
Yeah.
Right? A lot of, people call the dollar a currency. I say it's now it's a currency, a shitty one, but it's a currency.
Yeah.
But before 1970, it was nothing more than a payment method for gold. Right? It was a check to
Yeah.
write gold. Now
Yeah.
you called it dollars. You didn't call it like, oh, let me give you a bill of X grams of gold. You call it dollars, but it was pegged, and so it's just a
True.
payment method.
Yeah.
Much like stable coins are not currencies; they're a payment method for a fiat currency. But until we can get that denoted, in one of our coins type of experience, I think we'll continue to have some severe volatility, and that is the inherent challenge. Hopefully, a
Yeah.
startup can figure that out. Give people a motivating reason to denote financial contracts in crypto.
Remember, there was a time, and I don't know if it's still active, but on CoinGecko or on CoinMarketCap, you could actually denote everything in Bitcoin, and
Oh
then you
yeah,
could actually see how all the other coins were performing against Bitcoin. I wonder how
yeah.
many
No, I think
people
it's still
still actually
available.
use that feature. Is that is it
I
still
know I
available?
hear.
Or?
I don't know if it's still available. I've used it on an individual coin level on one of these like mobile apps that I use, where it's like,
Yeah,
okay, what's the price of Ether to BTC?
yeah,
And I feel like I hear that from a
yeah,
lot of coin projects that are kind of the anti-Bitcoin or
yeah,
trying to beat out Bitcoin in some way. So a lot of like Ethereum maximalists will say, "Oh my
yeah,
God, we hit new all-time highs against Bitcoin,"
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah,
That kind of
yeah.
thing. But Bitcoiners will never talk about that because obviously one Bitcoin's equal to one Bitcoin, as you hear, right? As the meme says, it never changes in value.
Yeah,
But I think that is a piece of the puzzle. Like, even if all the other coins become payment methods for Bitcoin, where I'll send you one Bitcoin worth in BCH, right? And this is the faster, cheaper payment methodologies, and people hold BCH or Ethereum or whatnot to be able to do things with it. But even if the transaction that we agree on in the real world, in the meat space, we agree on a Bitcoin amount, that
yeah.
would still be a huge step forward than us saying we agree on a dollar amount.
Yeah, yeah. No, we would. I remember. I mean, I still do. We denominate a lot of the coins, contracts in. I remember signing my first contract. It was 300 ETH, and it was just there was no negotiation. What's that calculate to, dude? Are you crypto or not? And then it's like, yeah, actually,
Yeah,
you're right. I can't say no
I
to
am
that. It's
crypto.
like, okay, let's do it. Right? It's like, how about
Yeah.
250 ETH? It's like, and then it's like, yeah. And so I remember that, and it was just such a different mindset. In the contracts, there was no other currency than 250 ETH, so it was like an amazing, just interesting.
And then the thing is, once you have that, you
Yeah.
realize that the thing that takes it to that next step is once you now have a contract at 250 ETH,
Yeah.
what interests you is, hey, can I pay for something in ETH? Can I get my
Exactly.
rent? Can I get my landlord?
All of a sudden.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. I was like, hey, can I pay you 1 ETH per month? It's like, that kind of thing. 2 ETH per month for rent. Because now it's like, okay, I know how much ETH I'm going to get, and I know how much I'm going to spend. And now I feel, much more at ease with the unit of account of ETH. That's the missing piece. What would be nice if we get a small little village, like Ethereum village, where that is the unit of account, and everyone denotes it in ETH, and they could be billionaires to the outside world, or they could be just starving homeless to the outside world. But internally, that's their unit of account, and within that village, which hopefully grows, comes stability of that asset.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of. Oh, there's so many things to go down that path. But I mean, in essence, if you look at these different blockchains and the communities associated with those blockchains, they are distributed village participants, right?
Financial villages.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
And so ultimately, the Ethereum is a nation in itself because it has a whole economy worth, I don't know, $200 billion or whatever the market cap is, or 300 billion. And that is driving and thriving around that whole ecosystem and has a nation of participants or citizens, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That are building around
it. It's missing the Ethereum Foundation's conference pegging the price of their tickets in ETH, from a year before they announce it to when the day of. And there have been some attempts at doing that, but then they realize, the price goes up, no one's buying the ticket, like that kind of thing. It's a tough problem to solve. I don't know if it's going to get solved anytime soon. But you just need another angle to solving the price stability is that so much money gets into the ecosystem that it's just hard to move the needle, right? Like the market cap gets just so big. It gets so big that it then motivates us because the needle doesn't move. Then we actually do put contracts priced in the unit of ETH or BTC or whatnot. And then that begets even more stability afterwards. But it might just be we need a whole bunch of market cap going in. Well, admittedly, if you look at Bitcoin relative to gold, we're not too far away. We're an order of magnitude, right? It's an order of magnitude.
It's about 10%, right? I mean, gold is what, 10 billion, 10 trillion or 10 trillion?
10 trillion. Yeah, 10 trillion. And we're like at less than 1 trillion. So it's an order of magnitude away. Now, are we an order of magnitude more volatile? I would say more.
Definitely
more than an order of magnitude, more than an order of magnitude. So the real question is, once Bitcoin hit, eclipses. Well, actually, you could take silver. What's the volatility of silver? And I think Bitcoin has hit the market cap of silver, but I think we're still more volatile than silver. So, and that's because unlike Bitcoin, silver has kind of a unit. It has value in a unit of silver. Like a unit of silver has specific value that is constant, which is I can use silver for a very specific purpose in the real world, and I need this amount of silver for that purpose. Yeah. All right, whether it be like, I don't have to use gold for fillings, not silver, but the physical use creates a certain amount of fixed value that stabilizes that use case, and Bitcoin doesn't have that yet. So still a ways.
I think one thing that always, it's like you talk about order of magnitude volume, right? I think liquidity matters a lot, right? And in the industry, the more liquidity is there, the more velocity of money in crypto, the more trading, the more building and sharing and exchange of goods and services associated with cryptocurrencies is really what's going to drive more stability in there, because the velocity just allows for more exchange and more stability thereby, right?
Yeah, I think the liquidity is a key piece. So when you have liquidity, you're just a harder ship to move on the ocean. Right? You're a bigger ship. It's just harder to move you. And I would say Bitcoin has hard to measure the liquidity relative to something like silver and gold. But the amount of liquidity increase in the system doesn't seem to have corresponded with an amount of stability increase. That's the part that's a little bit surprising.
Yeah.
You know, we've
that's true.
we have so many, and I think the reason why one of the reason why that might be true is that unlike a lot of other assets that have relatively centralized trading sources, Bitcoin has hundreds of places where you can trade it.
Yeah.
And so if you were to take all that liquidity and aggregate it into a single like NASDAQ, then that's a big ship that you can't move. Right now, you can move the price of Bitcoin on a smaller exchange with very little money. Then that price starts to become part of the global average. And then people say that the price is moving. And then, it takes a while for arbitrageurs to then kind of level it off. So you get some volatility due to this kind of small liquidity on a per exchange basis relative to the aggregate of all of the exchanges. And I remember bringing up a similar issue when I was talking to, I don't know if you know the Rootstock protocol, right? It's RSK, like smart contracts, DeFi on RSK, exactly. And one of the challenges they've got great, amazing projects, but each project in itself doesn't quite have enough of the liquidity to drive an adoption. And if they could pull it all together, then that'd be great. But instead, they've kind of more people have created more projects, whether it be a lending, borrowing project, a stablecoin. It's like 3 or so stablecoins, but a fourth isn't going to help. They're better off smashing all those stablecoins into one and adding all of that liquidity. So I think the distributed nature of Bitcoin and crypto's liquidity is one of the challenges, or it's contributing to the challenge of creating stability.
Yeah, but I mean, it does then bring a competitive advantage or edge to it as well, right? So you have then 3 stable coins that are competing against each other. They're optimizing, most likely they've open sourced their code base. So you can see the code that they're working on. You can find the bugs. If one falls down and falls apart, then ultimately the learnings from that gets embedded in the other 2 that then provide a stronger stable coin on that front. I didn't know that there were stablecoins on Bitcoin, though, but that's interesting.
Yeah, on Rootstock, there's a stablecoin on Bitcoin. The first one, USDT, although it's not an algorithmic Bitcoin, right? So there's the first one, but as far as on Rootstock, there's like 3 stablecoins on there. And I think the thing you just mentioned, which is it's, but there's 3 different ones, different protocols. And if one goes down, you have a backup. This is at the root and heart of the trade-off of decentralization versus centralization, right? If you think about it, any aspect of decentralization gives you that kind of fault tolerance and backup mechanism, but it introduces inefficiencies. Yeah. And that is the key part of inefficiency is distribution of power, distribution of resources, not so much power, but resources. Yeah. And when you distribute resources, you're not able to collaboratively collect all those resources to accomplish a single goal, right? You've got a bunch of great players in football, but you got to distribute them across 32 teams. What if you took the best players and put them on one team? Now you've got an all-star team. Yeah.
Right. But they can't play against anybody.
Because they've already won. They've won. There's no one to play against. They kick ass already in and of itself. And so that is at the heart of the challenge. Do you want to have the fault tolerance, or do you want to be able to have a level of adoption of at least something? And the nice thing, and the reason why Bitcoin got some adoption is it didn't have any competition when it first started. Its competitors were in a 10x worse class, which was fiat. Yeah. There was no competition. Yeah. Same thing with even USDT. So I remember talking to the Rootstock team saying, like, USDT is kind of, to many people's eyes, kind of shitty as it is, being fully centralized, very opaque. Is there really money behind it? It didn't have any competition. So it allowed it to achieve a very high level of adoption because there was nothing else to choose from. Once it achieved a high level of adoption, it created a demand for the entire ecosystem of stablecoins. Now competition started to come in. And then we see USDC approaching a lot of the levels, and BUSD and hopefully DAI approaching some of those levels. But if you start off with kind of equal playing field competition, but in a field that needs network effect. Competition is great when you don't need the network effect of one being adopted. But if you need a network effect and you've got just a bunch of competition, then no one succeeds.
No one succeeds.
All right. No one succeeds. So if you can use a product and you be the only one using the product, and you could use it and enjoy it just as if a million people used it, you don't care, then that's a product that does not need network effect. Yeah. And in that sense, that kind of a product can have a whole bunch of competitors. Yeah. So, that's kind of the way the world works. And then some of the challenges of money, the challenges of networks, and the challenges of liquidity.
And I think that's in crypto, that's sort of combined everything, right? The competitive advantage you have, you've built a product, right? You've actually focused very much on user experience from the beginning, right? And the value associated with your product is based on the strength of the community that actually uses it, and you build out that network effect associated. You have no legal requirements, you have no legal framework, no legal moats or jurisdictional moats that have been created to protect your industry and make sure that you can be the only one serving this customer base. You've got other wallets out there. You've got to build, you've got to innovate, you've got to satisfy the requirements of the community. There may be some inertia, but you still have to build. You have to constantly innovate. You have to create a great user experience based on the feedback that the community gives you. And you've done that, right? You've started off with Bitcoin, you added multi-coin, and then you've launched exchanges. You now are in DeFi services, right? How's that journey been? And how do you see that evolving as your community demands shift, given that we're now come from another bull market into a bear market? How do you see the next sort of wave going, and how does that impact the Edge wallet?
Got it. So I want to piecemeal what you said there first and correct one little piece. Is that Edge as a product doesn't necessarily have network effect or need network effect.
Okay.
If you ask myself, if I was the only person in the world using Edge, could I get all of the, and it didn't change. Obviously, if there was only one person using Edge, we wouldn't have enough revenue to sustain the product, right? But say that you could somehow still use Edge and be the only person using it, it would still feel like the same product.
Yeah.
You wouldn't lose any value. Unlike a Facebook, if I was the only one using Facebook, it would be a shitty product. There would be no purpose to be a part of it. So network effect is one of those things where if your product needs it, it's hard to get. But then once you get it, it's hard to lose. Yeah. Edge is not a product that needs a network effect. Everyone that uses it and enjoys it can use it, enjoy it as much as if there were 1 million more people, 2 million, 100 million more people using it, or if nobody was using it. So we don't have the laurels to ride on, which a lot of companies that gain network effect ride on that and get lazy. They're like, hey, everyone's kind of lock in. It's that lock-in mentality. If you're locked in, it's hard to leave because that's where your friends are. That's where the money is, blah, blah, blah. And then the product starts to suck, but you're still on it. Yeah. Think SMS. Yep. Right? It's ubiquitous. It's freaking everywhere. The product kind of sucks, but that's kind of the de facto standard, and it has not improved. It's just as shitty as it was 10 years ago. So Edge doesn't have that. And so because of that, we have to keep innovating. We have to keep delivering what people are looking for, what people are wanting, because there's no lock-in. Yep. They can kind of switch if they wanted to. So what have we found? Like, what is the weird bobbing and weaving that we have to do in this very, very volatile industry, not just price, but user demand, is definitely assets are probably the single biggest ask and challenge of a multi-asset application. Everyone and their mother wants some asset you've never heard of that, could become the next, Dogecoin that moons out of nowhere, Shiba Inu, or it could just be the thing that no one's ever heard of and just drives down to zero. Yeah. And if anything, running a company like Edge almost feels like running a VC firm. Because if you think about it, every asset you choose to support is an investment of time, money, and energy. Yeah. You might not be giving money, you might not be sending money outside of the company. You might even be receiving it. You might receive a grant for supporting that, but that grant never covers the cost of supporting the asset, especially not over time. Yeah. So really, you're deciding. You really put an investor hat on and saying, what are we going to support? Because what do we think are valuable products that contribute to the ecosystem, and what then should we put our time, money, and effort into? And that's, I think, drastically different than most other companies, especially in the general startup space and traditional startups that aren't in crypto. You don't have to put this weird investor hat on and like, hey, what are these different assets that we're going to support? And even to some degree, a lot of, in a way, centralized exchanges don't have to do it to the same degree either, because you don't have the challenge of client-side self-custody technology. When you're a centralized exchange, you could spin up a full node on a computer dedicated to that. Sure, there's some cost in spilling up that node, but there isn't a lot of the technology hurdles in doing client-side transactions, signing transactions, and the code that has to go in there, because that code is never identical to the full node. right? Every coin needs a full node. Not every
Yeah.
coin has a friendly client-side SDK that you can use to create a self-custody app. And that, and then to maintain that over time. So it is definitely a huge challenge. And that investor hat is the piece that's, I've never claimed to be, a VC investor. I haven't worked in that space. So that's probably the biggest challenge that I've had is figuring out what do we support. And it's always a mix of what the community also demands, right? The community demands certain needs. But then your engineering team has to decide how hard is it, and your support team decide how hard is it to maintain it over time, and the questions they're going to get and the support tickets are going to get. But that's one of the journeys, and that I've realized like it is a piece of the puzzle that is going to be a part of what we do for quite some time.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's the balance of a builder, right? I mean, you're balancing the pros and cons of where do I asset allocation, right? I mean, that's really where you're actually always making decisions, and the VC does the same. Their asset is just money, and your asset is also money, but it's actually represented in people and time,
energy,
right? Energy, right?
People and time. It just happens to have a very VC-like. Every startup, even not in crypto, does exactly that: asset allocation, people and time. The interesting thing about being in a crypto startup that supports multiple coins is you put on this kind of VC hat because you almost have to analyze a coin the way a VC would.
Yeah.
Right? Like, what's the opportunity? What's the opportunity there? What will be the user demand for it? What will be the potential volume demand for it? Just like a VC would think about it as an investment. The only difference is once you make that decision, as opposed to cutting a check or sending some crypto, you're sending energy. You're sending human energy into that. Yeah. That's the check you cut. But the analysis part feels a lot like VC analysis. Ironically, it really does.
Interesting. So from your, what are the things that you look for in a new coin?
Admittedly, like I said, this is what
new DeFi
I should
protocol.
Be doing.
Yeah,
that's what thinking like a VC is what I should be doing. Yeah. I'm not saying that that's what I actually do. Admittedly, I follow my heart a lot of the times. Yeah. Big into the privacy coins, big into the protocols that show like actual utility to end users from a viewpoint of financial services. So one of the big initiatives that Edge has over the next, over this year, we're launching stuff. We've already launched some stuff in DeFi. We're launching a big one that we announced beta for about a week ago, and more stuff going forward over the next year is tight DeFi integration. Right. Okay. And so what does that exactly mean? Well, right now DeFi is like, wallet connect on using Trust or Edge, and then a website. Yeah. And first you have to connect the wallet.
QR code,
you have to scan a QR code, which that isn't so bad. The problem is I'm literally scanning a QR code like 6 times to do one transaction. Exactly. One operation, one thing that I want to do, right, in one sitting. Like, for example, take out a loan. Yeah. Taking out a loan will be connect the wallet. For some reason, sign that I've connected the wallet. I'm like, I don't know what that's for. No. It's not an actual blockchain transaction. And then sign to deposit collateral, right? Actually, no, I take that back. Sign to approve the removal of a token for collateral, then sign to actually deposit the collateral, then sign to take out a loan, and then possibly, I might want to sell that stable coin that I borrowed into a bank account. Got to sign to do that. Rewind to the very beginning. I might have to convert some of whatever coin I have into the token that I can use to deposit as collateral. Think Bitcoin to wrap Bitcoin. I might have to do that conversion. So there's like a whole bunch of steps in order to do that. And that we're trying to simplify into just one, like how much do I want to borrow, slide to confirm. Now that's a lot of energy on our side. That's a lot of what I call like, VC investment. We're investing a hefty amount into making that a very smooth process that feels like CeFi. Now, where are we going to pour that energy? We're going to pour it into the protocols that we feel like are driving actual good value to the user base. And that's where we're putting our hat on. And I'm very excited from the viewpoint of like DeFi borrowing services. Because these services like absolutely perfectly replace CeFi, TradFi. Like there is like no reason to have the TradFi equivalent. I think I mentioned this to you before the show, but I think where TradFi comes in is where you may be taking on under collateralized debt, where you want to have to trust the person. Who are they? How do I go after that person? What address do I go to with a lead pipe in case you don't pay the loan? That kind of stuff. classic TradFi stuff, I don't
Yeah.
know that DeFi will ever be able to really compete, at least not very well with that. But for over collateralized loans, why go to CeFi? These services are better in almost every way, shape, and form, but the user experience has been shitty. But I think that's at the heart, one of the key the key feature, not features, but products that people are looking for and want to use. Just doesn't have a really good experience outside of CeFi. So we're looking at that, and Aave
So
being one of the leaders in that space.
how do you manage that then? Because I mean, a lot of these, let's say, lending protocol or derivative protocols or all these other protocols have different applications on different blockchains, right? So
Mm-hmm.
not all of them. So on Solana, they'll have their whole suite of different products, and then on Polkadot, on Cosmos, and then on Ethereum. So each one will have their own sort of ecosystem. How do you sort of then decide? Do you incorporate all of them? Do you support all
Right,
of
right.
them across each one, or
No,
do you
yeah.
find one common denominator that sort of works across many of them and then add one, or we just don't have a feature for that chain specifically?
Yeah, sometimes you just won't have a feature for that chain. Like the borrowing that we're implementing right now
Yeah,
is going to roll out on ETH and Polygon.
yeah,
All right.
yeah,
Solana doesn't have what we've seen as kind of an equivalent protocol with that kind of liquidity. And more importantly, it doesn't have a way to get into and out of that protocol
yeah,
easily. So, for example, when I go and borrow dollars on Aave, whether I use ETH or Polygon, I can get those dollar stablecoins into the bank
yeah,
in one transaction. I don't have to
yeah,
bridge this and that. And the same thing, if I've got an asset like Bitcoin, which is the granddaddy of crypto, and I want to collateralize that, how do I get Bitcoin into a tokenized Bitcoin on Solana?
yeah.
Notably harder than being able to use like a swap provider that gets it onto onto the Ether chain as Wrap Bitcoin
Wrap
or
BTC,
onto
yeah.
Matic. So I
Yeah.
think one of the key pieces of our analysis to giving a good user experience is, can the different chains and different protocols on those chains and the different coins you have to use, do they have good kind of outside ecosystem support? The exchange, the swap exchange support, the fiat on and off ramp support. If they do, that becomes much more feasible for us. Otherwise, we're creating a poor user experience for the user. So that's part of the analysis. And those just tend to come with some of the larger assets that have been used for a longer period of time in the larger protocols.
Yeah, so liquidity does matter in your decision-making process as well, right? And so, and
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
ultimately, the user base.
Yeah. With
Anyway,
things like ETH and Matic, unfortunately, they're pretty liquid.
yeah, yeah. No, super cool, Paul. Super exciting times in front of us, and I think thanks for sharing all your insights. I know I've taken up a lot of your time, but
Thanks
always
for
really
having
good
me.
learning,
Appreciate it.
deep technology understandings, and working through and having worked through all these different challenges. Where can people follow you? How can they follow you? I mean, obviously, everybody download the Edge wallet and test it out and check
Thank
it
you.
out. And,
Let us know.
yeah, yeah,
Check it out. Let us know. And then you
yeah,
can download that at edge.app. So simple
yeah.
domain,
There
edge.app.
you
You
go.
can find the app there,
Yeah,
links to
yeah,
the Play Store, the App Store, and also direct download for those of you that don't want to have Google Play on your phone or Android. You can direct download from the website as well. And you can find our Twitter handle, and you can find me, Pollinator with 2 L's, Paulli, Pollinator on Twitter. I tweet on occasion. Once in a while, I get on a rant, but usually just kind of lurking and seeing what people are saying, what the industry is up to. But definitely look us up. We also do for any that happen to be in San Diego. Imagine getting in-person support for using Edge. We actually offer that just for a
Oh,
little bit per week.
okay.
2 hours a week on Thursday mornings. There's actually a beautiful coffee shop with a nice little patio deck downstairs from our office. And so Thursdays 9:30 to 11:30. You can actually come if you have any questions about crypto, questions about Edge, need a little bit of hand holding. We're there for you. Not everybody can take a part of that, but a few people definitely have. And also give us a call. We answer the phones, believe it or not. Not too many crypto companies do, at least without charging you. But we do. So let us know what you guys think. Love to hear feedback. Check it out.
Yeah.
Let us know.
And I think also you always go to events. You pretty regularly go to events, and you're always very approachable. Is the right way. I remember you always being very approachable at events. So what's the next event you're planning to go to?
I'm not sure if I'm booked yet, but I will be at Mainnet, or at least ancillary in Mainnet. I've got a few meetings. I'm not sure if I'm actually going to go into the conference itself,
Yeah.
but I have a few ancillary meetings in and around Mainnet. But for sure, I will be at the Litecoin Summit. So I'll be speaking at the Litecoin Summit in October. So hope to see any of you listeners out there. Feel free, as Stefan said, I'm approachable, so feel free to say hi. I will possibly be wearing an Ed shirt. Hopefully, just recognize me. Definitely come say hi.
And one thing I forgot to ask you, which is I like asking people just something out of the blue and slightly random. It's like, what is your favorite book, or what book have you read recently that really stood out for you, or maybe a movie that you went to see, or a documentary you've seen?
I haven't read a lot of books as of late, but a few stand out from a while back. Two of my favorites were Born to Run. Book about, bunch of, I think it was Mexican barefoot runners and whatnot. Yeah. And believe it or not, there's a strong tie to a lot of my philosophy in crypto to that. But that's for another podcast. We'll have to do another time, or over a beer one day when I see you next.
Born to Run,
Born to Run, one of my absolute favorites.
That was sort of where we talked about barefoot running, right? That was when the whole Vibram shoes sort of came in.
Yeah. And I was sold. I wore only minimalist shoes. I even have minimalist dress shoes.
Oh yeah.
That they have, dress shoes have like that heel, the wood heel. My shoes have the wood heel, but believe it or not, it's actually carved out. So your heel goes all the way near to the bottom. So it has a false heel. And so that way it's like a flat zero drop.
Most people have the opposite. So they have heels that really
huge, giant, cushiony things. They don't realize that actually injures them. But Born to Run was my first foray into don't trust the big establishment. Yeah. Right. Like they're lying to you. They're hurting you, such as with these shoes that you think are very, very comfortable. Yeah. And then same thing got me into Bitcoin, crypto, and then as well, delivering happiness. And I think that's it's a book by Tony Hsieh, original founder or CEO of Zappos, which was acquired by Amazon. And that's a lot of what inspired our drive to community and customer support. He was huge on customer support at Zappos. Yeah. I had 3 friends, including a cousin that used to work at Zappos. And one of them worked in customer support, took phone calls. Yeah. And what they did was they would literally have competitions to see who could talk to customers the longest. And they'd have like department meetings where they'd play back this call from someone who just talked to a customer about their Europe trip and just really got to know them in the process of returning a jacket. And it's about connecting with the community. And obviously, I know that was an efficient thing to do. We don't necessarily do that here, but that's the reason why we have phone support, why we have on-site support, why we do a lot of community events. I invite you, by the way, if anyone's listening and you're working on a crypto project, reach out to me. About 1/3 of our office space is actually a little mini auditorium, can hold about 70, 80 people. And we have, like 4 different meetup groups come and use our space here in San Diego just for general events. And it's free. We don't charge for it. And so that's another piece of us just connecting with the community. And so delivering happiness was a big inspiration in that, connecting with your users, connecting with the community, connecting with the customers and supporting them. And so I invite people to reach out. Let us know if you want to speak at one of the meetups or want to host an event. And it's open to you as well, Stefan. So let us know when you're in San Diego, and love to have you.
I used to be down there quite a lot, so I might be down there again. And
you let us know.
Looking you up and checking out on Thursday. I'll come in and see as well for coffee.
For sure. Yeah, get the little support with your Edge app. Yeah, cool. Yeah, well, thanks.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks for your time, everybody. Super excited. If you're not after this call, then I don't know what. Let's get.
What's going to excite you?
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.